Welcome to our latest webinar, and thank you for joining us. For those of you who have watched our previous webinars, welcome back. For the newbies, it's great that you found us. To start things off, a very brief introduction to me. My name is Phil Underwood. I'm the engagement manager here at the Society for the Environment. I'll be handing over very shortly to our expert speakers before popping back onto the microphone to conclude the webinar with a question and answer opportunity. For those of you watching the webinar as a recording, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me at any time using the details that are on your screen at the moment. You're watching a Society for the Environment webinar. We hold a Royal Charter which was awarded in 2004. We hold a register for 2 professional registrations, the Chartered Environmentalist Register, or CEnv, and the Registered Environmental Technician Register, which is REnv Tech. The Society operates as an umbrella organisation currently made up of 24 wonderful professional bodies as licensed members. All of these professional bodies hold a licence to award the CEnv registration to their members. There are also 3 of these professional bodies who also award the Registered Environmental Technician or REnv Tech registration. They're now highlighted on your screen. The total number of CEnv and REnv Techs currently adds up to over 7,400 globally, and we have a number of those listening today, so welcome. To become a CEnv or REnv Tech, you'll need to be a member of and apply via one of these professional bodies. If you want to find out more, please visit socenv.org.uk, which is the website in the bottom left of your screen, or inquire with the relevant professional body. So, moving on to the webinar itself. This is the 3rd of our expert-led series of webinars. These series will provide perspectives from across the wide knowledge spectrum that is our registrant base and the sectors that they cover to increase knowledge transfer opportunities for our registrants and beyond. This webinar is the first of a 3-part series based around the topic of a sustainable built environment. Today we focus on arboriculture or urban trees and innovation, collaboration and playing in teams. So we have 2 speakers today, and to kick things off, our first speaker is Chartered Environmentalist John Parker, who is the Technical Director at one of our licensed members, which is the Arboricultural Association. I'll allow John to introduce himself further. So huge welcome to John. If you're all set, John, are you all set?
I think I'm all set, yeah.
Okay.
Is it going to go through my presentation if I...
Okay, so in that case, John, it's over to you to provide some insight into professionalism in arboriculture.
Yes, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. My name's John Parker. I'm the Technical Director at the Arboricultural Association. And I'll be talking quite a bit more about the Arb Association as we go along. And I've got about 15 minutes or so to talk to you about an issue that's very important to the association and to our industry as a whole, which is professionalism in arboriculture. So to give you a brief introduction, really, this beautiful view you can hopefully see on your screens now is that there's a building in the middle, which is the Arb Association head office. We're based just outside Stonehouse in beautiful Gloucestershire, so it's an absolutely wonderful place to work. But we're a national and international organisation. We're a charity. We're a membership organisation representing people who work in the arboricultural profession. And we're also a licensed CEnv member, so people can become chartered environmentalists through us. And there's lots of definitions online if you do a search as to what arboriculture is, some of them better than others. And I've tried to kind of knock up my own one, really, and it's there to be shot down. But the way that I'm describing it for the purposes of this presentation is the science and practice of the cultivation, establishment and management of amenity trees for the benefit of society. So when I talk about arboriculture or urban forestry, that's what I've got in mind. In reality, what we often hear is sort of arbora what? People don't really know what arboriculture is. And that's a real shame. And it's kind of frustrating because trees are very high up the political and public agenda at the moment. Everyone's talking about trees. They're sort of a hot topic. They've become fashionable, which is great. but no one's really talking about tree management as an issue, and no one's really talking about tree professionals. And that's a real shame, because the focus in recent years, or certainly the last 12 months, has been on ever escalating tree planting numbers. And you may remember from the general election of 2019, every political party really outcompeting each other with increasingly large numbers, some of them just a bit absurd, to be honest. But what people often forget is that planting is just one very small part of the process. It's a very, very important part, but the bit where you actually put a tree in the ground, in some ways, is the smallest part of the puzzle. There's lots of years of work go into producing that tree, finding out a location for it, deciding the species and the specification. Then you plant it, and then there's years, decades, maybe even centuries of work that goes into the aftercare of that tree. So we need to talk about establishing trees rather than just planting them. And that's where arboriculture comes in. And at the moment, when we're talking about tree planting numbers, trees are often seen as a sort of a catch-all term, and there's very little distinction made between forestry, for example, or woodland management, or arboriculture. And when people talk about planting 10, 20 million trees, 1 billion trees, 2 billion trees, what they're really talking about is plantations, forestry plantations, rather than the work that arboriculture looks more at, which is, for example, the picture on the right here, which is a street tree in Stonehouse, and these more sort of individual trees, or trees that form part of an urban population. So we need to get arboriculture recognised as a specialist discipline, but fundamentally, a lot of people don't know what arboriculture means. And that means that arboriculture often isn't seen as a viable career choice. I put it as a question there, but I think a lot of the time people don't know that there's such an industry there. I certainly didn't know about arboriculture till I was probably in my mid-20s. This isn't something that's getting out as an option for people to go into. The extent of the roles and opportunities are not known. People don't realise the whole wealth of professionals who work in arboriculture, all the people the Arb Association represent, from contractors and consultants, tree officers, policymakers, the nursery industry, researchers. There's so much there. It's such a huge industry. It's a science, as I've said, and a practice, but a lot of people don't really know about that. Tree work isn't always seen as a skilled profession. Tree workers, at whatever level they are, it's a hugely skilled profession, and it should be recognised as such. But we have a problem in that arboriculture is arguably an unregulated industry. And what I mean by that is anyone can go out, buy themselves a chainsaw and say they're a tree surgeon or a tree suggoin, as the advert on the right there that I've edited to spare their blushes. But this is, when people have heard about arboriculture or tree work, this is often what they think of: people who come along with a chainsaw, chop down your tree, and maybe do your patio at the same time. And as a result, the problem we've got is that arboriculture is not valued as a specialism. And if something's not valued, it's not getting adequate funding and support. It's not seen as an attractive career choice. So we're not attracting the very best people to join our industry. And the fact of the matter is that unmaintained trees will not reach their potential. And you end up with the photo on the right here, which is a forlorn looking tree pit with the stake that presumably once held the tree. The tree's long gone, but the sign says, "Please look after our trees." And I think that ship has sailed in this particular case. Fundamentally, there's no point planting more trees unless we're going to look after them and unless we can look after what we've already got. And that is where arboriculture comes in. And at the moment, I think a huge opportunity is missed, and we need to try and sort that out. And there's an opportunity to do so. There's good news. Headline here from The Guardian: tree planting has mind-blowing potential to tackle climate crisis. Everyone's talking about the climate. Trees are being seen as one of the solutions to the problem. And of course, they are one of the solutions, but they're not the only solution. They're not some magic bullet that's going to save the day. But it's good they're going up the agenda. BBC News here referring to what I've already mentioned, the tree planting promises that we saw in the 2019 election. And on the right here is a climate protest that I saw. This is in Lithuania, but you could have taken this picture anywhere around the world, really, because there's so much interest at the moment, particularly young people getting out on the streets, campaigning and fighting for change. And one of the tools they see at their disposal is trees. So trees are hugely up the agenda. So we've got a real opportunity. So how do we use that opportunity? Well, there's two ways that the Arb Association are trying to tackle this. And one is to encourage professionalism, and one is to raise awareness. There's other things as well, but they're the two sort of headlines for the purposes of this presentation. So I want to run through a few things quite briefly that the Arb Association do. All of this information is available on our website at trees.org.uk, but I want to go through some of the highlights. And one of the ways we're improving professionalism is through our schemes. So we've got approved contractor, utility approved contractor, and registered consultant schemes. Essentially, these are where tree professionals can demonstrate their abilities, their competencies, their qualifications, and they can essentially go on a list which says that they're approved or registered contractors or consultants, and that gives assurance then to the general public who are able to search for them on our website to see that they're getting a professional who knows what they're doing. So this is a way of separating the person who's just gone out and bought a chainsaw from the qualified professional. We do an awful lot of training. Again, it's all available on our website, but we do loads of training for CPD, for professionals who are already in the industry, for people trying to get into the industry, and for the general public. The logo there is VetCert, which is a new pan-European qualification, specifically looking at veteran trees, and that's a very exciting project that the Arb Association was involved in for the last few years. We run an awful lot of events. There's a few logos here. One is the Arb Show, which is our big public-facing event that we hold at Westonbirt and get thousands of people into. We hold student conferences to try and engage those people who are working up into the industry, to try and give them best practice information and disseminate knowledge to them. And we hold a big amenity conference every year, the Arboricultural Association annual amenity conference, that this year is going to be about trees and society. So a very exciting topic, how trees and people interact. We produce best practice guidance and disseminate that guidance to our members. This is a biosecurity guidance note that came out last year. We've also got lots of membership levels: technician member, professional and fellow member. So people who want to demonstrate their level of professionalism can become a member of the Arb Association. It's free for students to join up. And again, they can use these logos on their email signatures or on their sort of paperwork and demonstrate that they've achieved a level of professionalism in their industry. And of course, this is a CEnv webinar. We're one of the bodies that can issue Chartered Environmentalist status, and chartership, of course, is the pinnacle of professionalism, and we'd encourage people to sign up to become a Chartered Environmentalist. It's also definitely worth a mention of the Institute of Chartered Foresters, our colleagues there in the ICF, and we always recommend to people that if they're interested in Chartered Arboricultural status, to contact the ICF, and we work closely in partnership with them as well. So that's how we're trying to make things more professional, but then also it's about raising awareness. And there's three main spheres that I've listed here: political, public, and international. There's many others, but they're the sort of highlights. To try and raise awareness of trees, like these trees on the right here, which are also in Stonehouse. They're not just things you can stick in the ground, walk away and come back in 30 years and they're delivering all these benefits. If we want them to shade the street and make the place more livable, as these trees are doing here, then we've got to look after them. We need to get that message across. Politically, the Arb Association does that by meeting politicians, and on the right here you can see our former MP, David Drew, a fantastic MP for the area. He came in and spoke to us in the office to learn about arboriculture. Below is our new MP, Siobhan Bailey, who's also very interested in arboriculture, and she's proving an ally to us already. So we try and make friends in the House of Commons and the House of Lords to really exert some political influence. We're members of the All-Party Parliamentary Gardening and Horticulture Group and the Parliamentary Ornamental Roundtable, and we're involved in the production of this Economic Impact of Ornamental Horticulture and Landscaping in the UK document, which is available online. Also, a different level of political engagement. This is me. Sorry, I try not to use too many pictures of me in presentations. It's a bit embarrassing, but there's another picture of me, but this is me giving a talk at the Extinction Rebellion protest in London last year. Speaking to a completely different audience about trees and arboriculture and the importance of arboricultural professionals. So we try and work at the sort of top down, but we also need to get involved in the grassroots side of things and speaking to people about trees. So we do a lot of community work. I said we're a charity and we're very keen to get very involved in our local community. In this case, at the moment, sort of Stonehouse area. This is a tree walk that the Arb Association were involved in, taking a large group of local people. We did several of these, and just taking them out, talking to them about trees, explaining why trees are important and why they should care about trees. And it helps when you've got a beautiful sunny day and some fantastic trees like we've got around in the Stonehouse area. This is a tree planting event we held. Again, Stonehouse Town Council held this event, but the Arb Association supported it. Planting trees with the community, engaging particularly the young to come out and plant trees and take ownership and pride in their community, and explaining all the different benefits that trees deliver, but also explaining that if we want those benefits, we've got to look after the trees properly, because as I've said, planting is just one part of a much bigger jigsaw. And there's a couple of members of our team here, Steve and Sophie. And this is a stall we had very recently at a Stonehouse Community Climate Action Forum event, and we took a stand along and we were talking to people again about how trees can fit into the climate change agenda, how trees can help the environment, and we're getting out there and talking to people. So we're trying to work from the community and the political levels too. And we're also international players. UK arboriculture is hugely well respected around the world. It really is a big selling point for our country. We're regarded as being pretty good when it comes to sort of international league tables, if there were such a thing, of arboriculture. And the Arb Association certainly plays its part in that. We work very closely with the International Society of Arboriculture, the ISA. We also work with the European Forum on Urban Forestry and the European Arboricultural Council, three of the key international organisations who look at arboriculture and urban forestry. And in this way, we can not only promote UK arboriculture, but we get to go out there, learn best practice from all over the world, bring it back to the UK, and then disseminate it through our documents, through our conferences, through our meetings, to our members and to the general public, to really make sure we're getting best practice from all over the world. And the Arb Association is very committed to doing that. So in conclusion, I think there is a bit of a problem at the moment. I don't think arboriculture is recognised as well as it should be. It's not known as a really sort of serious specialist discipline. It's not seen as a science. And when people do think about it, they often think that it's just, I don't know, they don't see it as being a very important thing. And we have to address that, but there is an opportunity. The current political climate, the current actual climate, means that trees are high at the agenda. People are talking about trees, and this is our opportunity to really make the case that it's not just about planting a tree, it's about what goes before it, and it's about what goes after it, and that there is an entire industry of professional people dedicated to making that happen. And we have to get that message across, and we can do that hopefully through the opportunity that the climate crisis has given us. So what's the solution? Well, as I've tried to outline, I think we need to continue to raise standards professionally. We need to make sure that all those fantastic people working in arboriculture, whatever sphere of arboriculture they're working in, that they are recognised as being the outstanding professionals that they are. We have to give them the opportunity and the tools to demonstrate that. And we have to promote arboriculture and these arboricultural professionals to everybody, to the general public, to the politicians at all levels, local councils, national politics, and internationally. And of course, by working across industries, by working with our colleagues in forestry, in landscaping, in the wider environmental industries. And if we can do all these things, I think we can take the opportunity that we've been offered, and we can really make sure that people and politicians understand the importance not only of trees, but of the people who look after those trees as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. Very interesting insight into the world of arboriculture and the professionalism required, that's for sure. We're going to move swiftly on to Lynn. So thank you again to John. Move on to Lynn. Lynn Sini is a chartered environmentalist and runs her own company, Lytton Consulting. Lynn will be talking about changing the game, essentially. Welcome, Lynn.
Okay. So my challenge is 20 minutes speaking without deviation, hesitation or repetition, and to not overrun. So hold on tight. This is going to be something of a whistle-stop tour. I think it's fair that you should know that you should know something about me if I'm going to speak to you. So this is a little bit about my background. I've worked in the sustainable built environment for over 25 years now, and some of the work I have done has been at the project level. And increasingly now I'm working at national level, trying to help the industry solve some of the problems around sustainability. And as part of my role, I assess proposals for project funding where people think they've got innovations which will make the built environment more sustainable. I'm quite a fan of collaboration. I'm going to come up front with that. Having worked as a community environment worker in the inner city in Bradford, I'm very well aware of the pitfalls of doing things to people rather than doing things with people. And so for the last 20 years or so, I've been working a lot on collaborative design and community planning. I'm currently chair of an industry-wide initiative to improve the quality of the built environment, and that's the Design Quality Initiative for the UK Construction Industry Council. And I'll say that the reason that when I was talking to Phil about doing this presentation that we came up with this was because I'm watching people put a lot of time, money and energy into what they think are innovative ideas, but they don't stick. And they don't get delivered. And some years ago, I got interested about why this might be the case. And I did a course with the Open University as part of my MBA on creativity, innovation and change. And it really prompted this inquisitiveness, I suppose, about why we aren't getting the innovations we need. And when people are coming up with ideas, they're getting so frustrated that they don't stick. So hence this presentation. Okay, I mean, we all know that there's a serious problem in the built environment at the moment, and there's a whole range of issues that we need to deal with, and these are some of them here. But the built environment is quite a complex setup. There is a long life cycle for a building, and these are just some of the stages in which we need those previous issues to be addressed. And it's not even as simple as that, because as we go through, we find a huge range of professionals who are involved in the built environment. And as sustainability professionals, we've got to find a way of interacting with all these issues in all these stages of the life cycle with all these different professionals. And that makes a very wicked issue. And we know that we need innovation to help us tackle this wicked issue, because the current built environment is just not performing in a sustainable way. So when we think about innovations, what are we thinking about? Well, I would suggest that there are three main types of innovations that we need in the built environment. The first one is stuff. That's a technical term, and it could refer to materials, technologies, controls, or products. But we also need help with processes, the way that we do things, the regulations that we follow, and the standards that we use to help us shape the way in which things are done. And if we're going to talk to people about what we expect them to do, then we also have to think about behaviours, and this requires hearts and minds. And I want to come back to that, because we do need people's hearts and minds and their money to get some of the things done that we need to do to make a more sustainable built environment. Let's be absolutely clear. It really doesn't happen like this. Innovation doesn't come from setting somebody in a darkened room with a bag of ice on their head and leaving them until they come up with an innovation. And it doesn't work for a team either. And yes, you hear about Steve Jobs and others sitting in a garage suddenly coming up with the idea for Apple, Google, other things. It really doesn't work like that at all. That's an idea. An idea is not the same as an innovation. And in fact, an idea without implementation remains that, it's just an idea. And if you get as far as a prototype or a test or a pilot, that's not an innovation either. That's an experiment. That's a thought piece. They haven't had any impact. And so ideas and prototypes, tests or pilots, they all need people to adopt them before you can really call them an innovation. And if you want people to adopt them, research suggests that there are four main ways in which you do that. You make it something which is very useful to the individual. You make it something that adds value or from which they can make money. Something that gives a personal benefit in the way that they feel about themselves or the way that they feel about being a member of a wider group. Or something which is simply unavoidable. You don't have a choice, some kind of legislation perhaps. And I honestly think that the worst three words I could hear from someone who says they are an innovator or is that they have an innovation is, well, they should. Because to me, that means they haven't found a lever to adoption, getting the potential customer or the user to see the usefulness, the value, or the benefit of the innovation. Or the other statement that is made, the government should make it compulsory or regulate for it to happen. Well, they should make it compulsory. And that's an interesting one, because we live in a democracy and people really don't like being told that they have to do something. And we have to do a lot of convincing of those who make the rules if we're going to make a well, they should statement. And those people are not likely to make it. The governments or regulators are not likely to make that decision if they are not going to get re-elected. And if it's a company, they're not likely to make that decision if their share prices dive and they'll lose their jobs. And this, I think, is where we start to look at the wider environment around innovation. I've simplified this quite a lot because we have only got 20 minutes, but I think this is a good way of sharing the innovation process for a wicked issue. And I'm going to use the Merton Rule as a good example. For those of you who weren't around in the early 2000s, the Merton Rule was something which the London Borough of Merton came up with to impose on all large planning applications. And it basically said, if you're putting in a planning application here and it's a large application or a major application, we expect you to produce a given amount of energy on site from renewable sources. So if we start on the left-hand side here, the problem that they identified was that we have a problem, an issue with climate change, and we've got too many carbon emissions. And they start to think about that and exploring the problem. And the conclusion is that renewable energy generation isn't happening. There's a lack of developer impetus for installing renewable energy on buildings, and there's lots of potential to do so. And around this time, there was a lot of research and publicity going on saying, yes, carbon really is a big issue. It's taken over from some of the previous issues, hole in the ozone layer perhaps, and waste, which were more prevalent in the 1990s. So the team puts their head together, and local people are doing lots of campaigning, and they come up with the idea of the Merton Rule. And there's now political will to do something about it within Merton Council. So the policy is thought up. 10% of total predicted energy use has to come from the new development. Now that's quite innovative. It's a process innovation. It didn't specify the stuff you had to use to produce the renewable energy. It was technology agnostic, and it was also a can't avoid. The motivation is if you want to get planning permission, you have to do this 10%. Early adopters innovate, so Merton starts, and then it gets picked up by other local authorities as well, the Mayor of London and others, and then finally in 2008, the Planning and Energy Act, PPS 1, enabled all councils to adopt the Merton Rule. And so it became the norm, and it's widely adopted, and it's no longer seen as innovative. But it also starts to throw up some spin-off problems. When people started looking at its success, it was actually more pounds efficient, i.e. you could save more energy per pound if you made premises more airtight. So if you designed them better. And as you designed them better, then spending the money on that rather than spending it on the renewables became seen as a better solution. And there was a bit of a kickback from developers and some engineers, some for good reasons, some for bad. But in the end, the policy got dismantled a little bit. Now, is that a failure? I don't think so. I think it actually pushes you back and says, okay, we know that there's been an issue here around the whether or not you should spend your money on renewable energy, but actually what it did do was really kickstart the renewable energy industry, and it got the price down significantly for fitting renewables on buildings. So it was actually very successful in some ways, but it was a stepping stone. It was part of the road towards more sustainable built environment. And perhaps that's one of the things that we miss sometimes, actually seeing innovations as a stepping stone and always being ready to create the next one. It is interesting to note, though, that government, under the Future Homes Standard consultation, it's asking whether or not councils should be allowed to set their own standards or whether only national standards should apply. And that's an ongoing issue. In my view, the ability to allow local authorities to set standards means that they can innovate, and perhaps something like the Merton Rule would never have happened because government would have feared making a blanket rule of this type. Okay, so if we start to look at producing the innovation, you can see from the previous diagram that multiple stakeholders are needed to produce it. You need that variety of perspectives, expertise and knowledge, and sometimes representation to understand why someone might object to or not pick up or not adopt the innovation that you've seen, or to tweak it or to shape it. We know that groupthink is a real risk when you get people of a similar background or similar thinking together, and that narrows the appeal of the innovation, and it also minimises the understanding of potential opposition. There's also a tendency to try and avoid conflict. I don't want to ask them in because they won't like it, but I would argue that conflict, managed admittedly, is okay and even useful and possibly essential before the innovation is launched. It's much easier to address obstacles when you're designing or when you're creating an innovation, whether that be a policy or a product, than to actually do it after you've launched it. I'm going to show you in a minute that technical expertise is not enough on its own to create an innovation. It really isn't, whether that's a policy or a product or a behaviour, it's not enough. And neither is rebranding and marketing, honestly. Let me show you why. The Bic pen, famously developed as an innovation for women. And when you look into it more closely, what they did for the innovation was make it pink. It was laughed away, and Bic took quite a hit on that, and correctly so. Colgate thought they'd innovate with a new product line. I don't know what that white stuff is in the lasagna, but a lot of people thought it might be toothpaste. So that sunk without trace. And then the technical side. Remember this? Sinclair C5. Technically, it's a very good piece of kit. It gets you around. But it was marketed as an innovation, as a technological way forward, and it really isn't. You get wet, you can't get your luggage in, it takes up a lot of space, you don't have a good vantage point, etc., etc., etc. So a bunch of technical people with some great marketing came up with an innovation which eventually died, and you'll find this one in the National Motor Museum at Bewley if you want to go and have a look at it. Innovation for wicked problems really does need collaboration. So how does collaboration work then? Does it just happen if you stick a load of people in a room? Well, no, it doesn't. And collaboration, good collaboration, has a series of conditions which increase the likelihood of it succeeding. It's working together to create something in support of a shared vision, and it's usually something, a way of doing something which cannot be created by one party alone. Whereas cooperation, which is completely different, is about helping people deliver their own goals. I'll help you to get something you want, then you help me. And it's definitely not the same as compromise, because compromise is about finding the most acceptable solution for multiple parties. And usually it gets everybody negotiating away from their preferred position. Everybody gives something up. So it's starting from a pre-prepared position and working back. Whereas collaboration is about starting from a shared objective and working up. And it's really important to acknowledge concerns and not to pretend they don't exist, and to manage but not to bury conflict. You don't have to like the people you're working with, but you do have to work with them or with intermediaries that can work with them. And that's where the build trust, maintain trust and rebuild trust comes from. A really interesting case study is the Northern Ireland peace process and the work that Mo Molam did. She actually went into the Maze prison to meet some of the Republican prisoners, and some of those included who were on hunger strike, and they were former terrorists. They were in prison for being terrorists. And she took that step to build trust, and she took it at some personal risk. And she kept taking it, and she worked with intermediaries to build trust within all the different communities in Northern Ireland. And the singular objective that they used to create the condition for collaboration was, it is not right that innocent people get killed. And every time things fell apart, they could go back to that common shared objective to stop innocent people being killed. I thoroughly recommend, by the way, her autobiography. It's a really interesting look at how collaboration can work. The other point I would say is, when you are collaborating on a wicked issue, it's really important to work at different points in the process. I am not a very good campaigner, but I often work with campaigners who campaign very well. There are other people who make great products. They probably need to collaborate much better with the people who understand how you can get those products used. So working at different points in the process is really important, and collaborating together. The other point that I find useful is design backwards and deliver forwards. So remember what your objective is, and then put together the stepping stones that take you towards it. These are some of the characteristics of good collaborators, and this work comes from Warwick University and what they did for the Institute for Collaborative Working. And it's really interesting because it actually says that people who want to collaborate need to develop or already have these key characteristics. Now, the ones that interest me are willing to be proved wrong, which a lot of technical experts find really, really difficult. Empathetic, being able to see the perspective of another side, and good at communicating well and transparently. Now, perhaps those are three things that, as technical specialists, we don't always do as well as we might. But it's certainly something on the softer skills that I think environmental professionalists and sustainability professionalists really, really need to think about, because it is about the soft skills that enable you to get things moving forward, not just about coming up with a technically correct answer. So a final few thoughts on innovation, and the picture on the right here is chosen deliberately. That's Tar Steps Bridge in Exmoor. It's over 2,000 years old. It was an innovation of its time, and it still works, and people have developed the idea, made it better, but actually that's still a pretty good bridge. So perfection is the enemy of progress. You can't always wait for the perfect solution, because we are tackling wicked issues with very, very short-term consequences. So sometimes we need to be prepared to learn as we go. And sometimes innovations need to be a stepping stone, new products, new systems or behaviour, but not perfect. And I sat in a meeting the other night where it took 45 minutes for a group of people to argue about the best metric to measure carbon, which is absolutely great, but it was stopping the rest of the debate, which is about some of the practical measures that could be taken. It's not always going to be perfect. Sometimes we take the stepping stone. It's also important to think about critical mass. I don't know if you remember the adverts for CPR starring Vinnie Jones, where he was advertising resuscitation without the kissing. And basically, it was teaching people to do chest compressions to the rhythm of Staying Alive by the Bee Gees. Now, it's really important. And in some cases, chest compressions on their own will work, and that will save lives. And it will save more lives than doing nothing. People really put off by the idea that they would need to give breath or touch someone else's lips, really horrified by it. So it was thought better to get people doing something rather than nothing. And in most heart attacks, it will have some benefit, but not all. Still better than doing nothing. If you are a first aid professional, you'll be taught chest compressions and rescue breathing. Don't rule out upcycling what already exists. Look at the bridge on the right. We could have said, oh, we've got a bridge, we've got a way of getting across the river, we don't need to have a new one. But actually, upcycling is really important. Fleming discovered the mold containing the antibiotic penicillin in 1928 and saved the world, right? Well, actually wrong. It wasn't until 1938 that Dr. Howard Florey of Oxford University came across the research paper and took the next steps of isolating the active ingredient of the penicillin juice from the mold and purifying it. Dr. Ernst Chain helped cultivate the mold needed, and it wasn't until 1941 that Dr. Norman Heatley learned how to mass produce it to get sufficient doses to totally cure an infection. And even then, it was a very inefficient way of doing things because it wasn't a particularly efficient species. It didn't produce high quantities of penicillin. And actually, it was a lab worker 3 years later who, on a hunch, picked up a mouldy cantaloupe lemon at a market. And this rather lovely golden mould turned out to be a much more productive source of penicillin. They could have all stopped when they got penicillin and said, we've done that, we'll look at something new. I don't want to look at what someone did before. And we would have lost a very effective antibiotic if they'd have done that. Familiarity breeds contempt. I rather like this phrase, but it basically says that you tend to think that whatever you're doing is the easiest way of doing it. And that's because you put a psychological investment into learning how to do it. So don't believe that just because something is easier, everybody's going to jump on it. They're not. There is a cognitive switching cost that you have to get over. And that's something that you need to challenge in your team, looking at creating an innovation, but also challenging in the people that you want to take up the innovation. And finally, don't believe that only bright young things can innovate. Some of the innovations I see and when asked to comment on have been formed up by 4 young people sitting in a room with a piece of paper coming up with a brilliant idea. But actually, research by Vivek Wadhwa at MIT shows this not to be the case. The average and median age of the founders of successful US technology businesses, i.e. ones that have got real revenues, is 39. There are twice as many successful founders over 50 as there are under 25, and twice as many over 60 as under 20. It's one of those occasions where age is beneficial, not necessarily in ideas, but in getting the ideas and making them stick, in creating something from them, in getting them to actually have an impact on the ground. So these are my key takeaways, and I'll leave it for you to read yourselves. I'm sure you can all read. But we do need innovation, and we need collaboration to deliver innovation that works. We're dealing with wicked issues here. We're dealing with trying to create a sustainable built environment. Multiple issues, multiple life stages, multiple players. It requires working with lots of different stakeholders from different backgrounds to get things to stick. And my premise is that we need to innovate in the way that we do things, not just in what we do. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lynn. And another thank you to John as well. Just take over the screen again there. That was really interesting. I very much liked the examples from outside of the general topic of what we're talking about, but that allows people to then think outside the box a bit about what these concepts actually mean, if you can apply it to other things. So I very much hope that everyone found these 2 talks interesting today. We do have our Q&A function, our Q&A session coming up now. We did ask for any questions that you had before the webinar as well, when you registered. And we do have a few of those, which I'll go through now, give you the opportunity to ask any more questions that you have. So we had a question in, which is directed towards John. What can we do as individuals to encourage increased tree planting in the urban environment?
Good question. Well, I think, can you hear me? Yeah, sorry, I just want to check. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's, first of all, I say there's lots of different organisations and charities and community groups all over the country that sort of exist already. So it may be that there's already a group in your area that is looking for new members, so you could go along and talk to them. And if there's not, you can look at doing it yourself, really. Trees are quite an easy sell. People like trees, they're interested in trees. And it's a good way to engage people. It's a good way to bring communities together. So you could maybe work with your local school, you could work with any sort of group in the area and push for tree planting in your local area. The first place to start probably is speak to your local tree officer. I'm a huge fan of tree officers. I spend a lot of time telling people how great tree officers are, and I really believe it. And tree officers are a good place to start. They might tell you about any local groups, and they might be able to give you some of the guidance you need to get more trees into your local area in a sustainable and a sort of professional way.
Would they be local council tree officers?
Yeah, so tree officers mainly work for the local authorities. You can get public realm tree officers that look after the sort of publicly owned trees in parks or on the highways, or planning tree officers that take care of developments and British standard reports and that sort of thing, and tree preservation orders. So yeah, go to your local authority and hopefully they've got a tree officer. If they haven't got a tree officer, then you should ask them why not, because we'd like to see every local authority having well-resourced and supported tree officers.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot here. That's, I guess, UK based. That's reasonably straightforward. Outside of the UK, is it a similar picture? It depends, I assume.
Well, yeah, I mean, the easy way to get out of that to say is it depends what country you're in, because obviously there's different things everywhere. But I think the principle remains the same, which is, there's no point reinventing the wheel if there's already a group near you that's looking at planting trees. So I just do a bit of a sort of search to see what there is out there. And if there's not, then look to start something up yourself. That applies all around the world. But you don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. You don't need to start from scratch. People have been setting up these groups for a very, very long time. So learn from them, learn from neighboring towns or cities, learn from different countries if you need to go further afield. The same principle applies everywhere in terms of people caring about trees, the benefits that trees bring, and the idea of planting trees in a sustainable way. That's the same regardless of where you are in the world. So yeah, look to, as we just heard, in the last presentation, look to collaborate and work with others.
Okay. The next question that came in before the webinar was aimed at the Society for the Environment, really, so I can probably answer this. Does the Society collaborate with the Woodland Trust and local authorities? As far as I'm aware, we don't directly collaborate with the Woodland Trust and local authorities. However, there is absolutely no reason why we wouldn't if there was opportunities out there for us to do so. There are certainly chartered environmentalists in the Woodland Trust and across many local authorities in the UK. So in short, as far as I'm aware, we don't have direct collaboration, but there's no reason why we wouldn't, and we'd be open to any opportunities that are available there. And another question that was aimed at me really was, when registering for the webinar, why does the drop-down menu for industry not have arboriculture listed? Well, that is a faux pas for us, really. It's a Zoom automated list, which we don't have any control over, which is an excuse, but we need to look at that and change it. So thanks for the feedback on that one. We do have some questions in from live on the webinar, so that's fantastic. Thank you very much for that. This one again is aimed at John. Firing them at you at the moment, John. Thank you for an interesting presentation. Good start. Are there arboricultural standards and obligations that local authorities are obliged to comply with? They are appalled by the way that trees are indiscriminately cut down in urban environments.
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, I suppose I'd say that it may look indiscriminate sometimes, but it's often not, and sometimes there's a problem with communication rather than anything else. I worked as an urban tree manager for 10 years, and I have to say I've cut down my fair share of trees, and I've pruned my fair share of trees. So it does have to happen, and it's part of good tree management. I think really there's not so many, I wouldn't say there's standards and obligations that local authorities have to fulfill. Some local authorities have tree strategies, which sort of set out their approach to tree management and other green infrastructure management. But I guess to go back to the answer to the previous question, it's, tree officers are the people who are located within local authorities who look after trees. That is their whole purpose. Nobody loves trees more than tree officers. That's why they go and take all the flack they get. They could earn more money going off doing something else. They take all the flack they get working for trees genuinely for the public good. They are a fantastic group of people, and they're not given proper support. They're not given proper resources. And a lot of the time, it's not that they don't know what they should be doing, it's that they don't have the resources, the time and the support to do it, or maybe that local authorities have got rid of their tree officer function altogether. That's when you start getting indiscriminate tree removal and tree pruning. So I say again, really, it's a plea to support your local tree officer, find out who they are, send them a nice email saying they're doing a great job. That kind of thing counts for a lot in the local authority world. And if you haven't got a tree officer, then go to your local authority and find out why and how those trees are being managed.
And see if you can become that tree officer. Who knows?
Well, I'd say there's, you want to start with, it's a qualified technical specialist role, but absolutely, yeah, please, we need people in the industry who care, definitely.
Okay, a question for Lynn, that's okay. I often see innovation and tech advances in the built environment coming from the big construction and consultancy companies. How can we try and drive innovation from small to medium-sized contractors that maybe don't have the resources?
I think this is often a problem. To my mind, it's sometimes about who you link up with. There are a number of smaller innovations, particularly product innovations, that have come around from professional partnership and intellectual property sharing. So I used to work for Bizria. There were a number of small technical producers who, for example, had gone to work with Siemens and saw it as a actual partnering arrangement. So if you are that small and you need help to upscale, that's one way of doing it. There are also some programs around like the Climate Kick program, which is often looking for technology partners, but that too, it's really difficult to get into because again, they're looking for the larger organizations. So I would suggest that partnering and brokering is an answer. Now, one of the things that we're not very good at as a profession is actually joining up the different sizes, and I'm not sure whether that would be done by an organization in the business sphere looking to support small businesses, but I would identify it as a gap.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to go for two more quick questions, if that's okay. John, do you have any recommendations for the construction industry to protect and enhance trees in the construction phase of projects?
Yeah, well, it's kind of, I guess, quite a big question, but broadly speaking, there's a British standard, BS 5837, which is trees in relation to design, demolition and construction. And all planning applications that would have any impact on trees at all should be completing arboricultural reports under British Standard 5837, which set out what trees are on site, how they should be protected, and how they're going to be monitored during the construction process. So ensuring that the planning applications are going in properly and ensuring that British Standard 5837 is followed is very, very important. There's lots of technology out there now, whether it's sort of root cells to ensure that there's avoiding compaction on the root systems and various different things that can be used, but we have to follow the processes. And again, sorry, I sound like a broken record, but one of the roles of the planning tree officer is to oversee these development sites and ensure that the developers are doing what they've saying they'll do. But again, with limited resources and limited support, tree officers don't necessarily have the time to get out there and do the job they want to be doing. So there isn't always quite as much scrutiny as there should be, but it's certainly a problem, and it's certainly something that we're trying to address as industry. And one of the ways you try and address that, of course, is by making the case for trees as not just a luxury, not just a nice thing to have, but an absolutely invaluable piece of urban infrastructure that is essential to a healthy, livable city. It's not an extra to go next to the building to make it look nice. In many ways, it's just as important as the building and could well live for a longer time than the building. So you need to make sure the trees are treated with the respect that they should be.
Okay, a quick added question for that. The developers themselves, are they likely to have arboricultural professionals working within their teams, or is it very much focused on the tree officer enforcing what they should be doing?
Well, if a developer comes to the point where they have to write a British Standard report, then they should be looking to engage an arboricultural consultant, hopefully an Arboricultural Association registered consultant, of course. So they should be getting their own consultant to produce that report, but then that report then goes to the local authority tree officer who reviews it and sort of determines whether or not that's suitable. So it needs the developer to do what they're supposed to be doing, but it also needs to have a strong local authority presence to make sure that everything's being done as it should be.
Okay, last quick question for Lynn. What would you recommend as a good way to start for an early career built environment professional to carry forward and implement technical innovations which address the need for climate mitigation and resilience of our infrastructure.
That's an interesting
That was a
one.
mouthful.
I would say try and understand the people who you want to implement your innovation. So if it's a technical innovation, someone's got to decide to buy it, someone's got to decide to fit it, and someone's got to guarantee that it's going to work. So when you put your innovation together, or when you spot an innovation that you think is promising, try and think about the benefits that it offers in terms of the people that you want to use it, not just in terms of the technical problem that you want to solve.
Okay, so we're going to bring the Q&A session to an end there. Apologies if we didn't get to your question. Hopefully some of the other answers have answered some of your questions anyway. I've tried to make sure they're grouped together in some kind of way. Again, a huge thank you to Lynn and John for your talks today. Really very interesting from two different areas of a sustainable built environment, which is the idea behind the whole webinar series. So thank you very much to you guys again. If you stay with us for just a moment, we have a few other things just to make you aware of. The next two parts of this webinar series are coming up. So part 2 is on the 27th of February, part 3 is on the 12th of March. Part 2 is a talk with a few people from Anglia Ruskin University. And the part 3 is a bit of a HS2 special, looking at things like the soil management and sustainable construction of HS2. So that should be interesting. And series 5, which will be the next series, which is based on climate change, a 2020 perspective. We are now looking for speakers to help provide their insight into climate change as it looks now, and what the future opportunities are for protecting ourselves against climate change, or reversing it, who knows. So that's happening in April, hopefully. So if you'd like to provide your expertise for that, then please get in touch with me. The webinars that we run are all recorded and they are available on our website with the website address on your screen now. You can also find them on our YouTube channel, and they include series such as this, which is cross-disciplinary knowledge sharing webinars, but we also have the how to become and why become Chartered Environmentalists and Registered Environmental Technicians. So if you want to learn more about that, then please watch those recorded webinars. They'll give you a good insight into how to do that, and you can become a Chartered Environmentalist just like John and Lynn. A note to hold the date for later this year. The 4th of June is our Awards and Lectures for World Environment Day, which we do every year. And if you just hold that date for now, details will be coming out very, very shortly. And on that date, we will be awarding the 2020 Environmental Professional of the Year. You've got some past winners on there who were fantastic. We get some really good applications for this, but we were aware that a lot of environmental professionals, if you're a chartered environmentalist or registered environmental technician, you can both enter into this. And there are some fantastic people doing some great work, and we want you to showcase that. So please put in your own nomination for yourself or for a colleague or one of your peers in your network. Nominations will be open very soon, so keep an eye out for that. One thing also to note around the built environment is if your organisation hasn't done so already and you are aiming for to get to net zero carbon, then you might want to pledge to net zero. Find out more by going to pledgetonetzero.org. You'll find out more information on there. So please have a look at that. And that's it from us today. Thank you for listening and taking part. If you're watching the recording on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel and hit the bell to gain notifications of new videos, and tap the big thumbs up like button. That would be fantastic. If you're watching on our website as a recording, please click on the YouTube button in the bottom right to get to the subscribe and like options. And we'll see you in the next webinar. Thank you very much for watching.